me Crazy Joe, but now they can call me Batman.
What up? Welcome back to the Necro Zoo. I am Bones. And in this one, we're going to do a video that I've actually wanted to do for a long time. Finally set it up, finally ready to get into a head-to-head competition between DC Multiverse and Marvel Legends. Now this will be a competition about articulation. Now if you're wondering, I did do my research on this. I have looked up a lot of recent reviews of Marvel Legends figures like the Black Panther and the Blue Marvel, a couple of other ones, watched a lot of Anthony Customs. Now we will be taking a look at two assassins and badasses from both lines, from both universes. You have Crossbones on the Marvel side, and actually I'm a big Crossbones fan, especially like the early 90s original Crossbones. I didn't like it too much when they kind of changed them in the live action films. That was just the version I was not interested in, but the original comic version is awesome. And then on the DC Multiverse side, we do have Slade, Deathstroke. Now this is the Rebirth version, and it is one of the newer versions that was released from McFarlane. So I am not really going into this blind or doing anything that I think is not on the up and up. This is going to be a straight up common Marvel Legends articulation and body versus a common McFarlane DC Multiverse figure. Now there will be a little bit of discrepancies because of course all lines have different figures that have different ranges, but this is basically just a real quick straight up head-to-head competition. And the reason I'm doing this is because there's been a lot of I guess false, basically lies spread about McFarlane and the DC Multiverse line that I do not really appreciate. Now ever since the big civil war between Marvel Legends collectors amongst themselves, there's been a reduced amount of worms in my comments, wanting to get smacked down. And that's been pretty nice because in the end, you should collect what you like and let other people collect what they like. And you should just keep it as that. But since they do love to run their mouths a lot, I finally wanted to get these together and do a little comparison video on articulation. And I think you will be kind of surprised at the outcome. Some of us won't be, but a lot of common collectors and regular collectors will be surprised to see the differences in articulation between these two lines. So this might open up some eyes and show you that these are definitely not statues, and these sometimes don't live up to the hype. Now I know this is an older Marvel Legends figure, but they do kind of keep a lot of the same articulation. I have watched newer reviews and they are basically the same, although they are shifting a little bit more and surprisingly moving a little bit more towards a McFarlane DC Multiverse style of articulation, if you can believe that. But for the longest time, they always say that, I would even see in the comments, I wish that McFarlane would make figures more in line with the articulation of Legends. And once I put these two together, I was really surprised at the outcome. Now, who should go first? I'm going to go ahead and give it to Legends. Let's see what they got. Age before beauty. So let's take a look starting at the top. We're going to take a look at the head. Now, first off, most basic Marvel Legends have a different articulation setup at the head than a McFarlane. These have like a sort of ring joint in the neck. And right off the bat, you could actually see it. It's really prominent to the eye, and you could see the line cut there in the neck. Now let's check out the articulation range. Now he does look down really well, but on the back of the neck it does show that ring joint part, so that's not too appealing. He also looks up really well, but the same thing here at the bottom of the neck. Now you expose that joint. Of course he does have right to left, but what he does not have is tilt. So there's like a slight tilt, but it's very minimal. You could almost say non-existent. So he can't like tilt his head for some character or give him a little bit of attitude. So that's not too cool on the Marvel Legends head articulation. Now let's go ahead and take a look at Deathstroke. Let's see what he has now. If you look at him right off the bat, it is a clean sculpt and design. There is no breakup, no lines in the neck as we had in the Marvel Legend. Now he can look down the same, really far down, almost to where his chin touches his chest. And there's no breakup in the back, so that's pretty nice. He looks up also extremely well. You could see the whole neck actually underneath his chin, but there is no ugly breakup of that hinge that Marvel Legends has. You do have right to left, which is basic articulation. But now let's go ahead and look at the tilt. And of course, DC Multiverse has awesome tilt. Now this is allowed to give him a lot of character, and also just the range of swivel in the neck is just superior to the Marvel Legends neck style. So this round actually goes to DC Multiverse easily, and that is not a big surprise to me. Now for round 2, we're going to look at the arms completely, starting at the shoulders. Now, I know that this version does not have a butterfly in the shoulder joint, whereas the Marvel Legends usually use a traditional butterfly joint, which is they have it cut out at the chest and on the back, and that allows for front to back movement and a little bit of up and down. This one has neither of those, so the shoulder articulation is very minimal, but he does have a bicep cut. Now, I'm not a big fan of 360 in any articulation because that is not humanly possible, but he can get the 360 at the bicep. Now let's take a look at the bend at the elbow. Now, surprisingly, he is a double jointed figure at the elbow, but he does not have the full range, which means that he only bends at the elbow at about 45 degrees. So you're not actually getting that full range of motion at the elbow, and it could be because the arms are bulky, but a lot of Marvel Legends actually have this same problem. Now, I did say let's do the whole arm, so we're going to look at the actual wrist. Now, Marvel Legends does have a clean line from the forearm going down into the wrist. I'll give them that. But what they do not have is they only have 2 pivots of articulation, which means that if the hand moves down like this, it'll move up the same opposite direction, but you cannot swivel it and get the other range. It's locked there. So it only really has, let's say it only has this, but it doesn't have this. And that is all Marvel Legends. There's no differences. There is no figures that seem to have this. They all have the same basic peg in the wrist. So that is like a reduced scope of articulation. But I'll give it to them. The arms do look really nice, but this is not about sculpt and design. This is actually about articulation, but he does look good. So now let's go into Deathstroke's arm articulation. Now, he does have the McFarlane butterfly joint with an actual bushing. So this gives him a lot more range. And you can also have up and down and front to back movement. So like a completely different concept than the cutouts, because you do retain a lot of the actual chest and back, but you do get some added range of motion. Now he also does have a bicep swivel, and I don't really ever like to do this, but let's see if he could get the 360, and of course he can. So that is awesome. Now let's take a look at the bend at the elbow, because he is also a double jointed figure. But just look at the range. His arm actually collapses all the way down on itself, which is far superior to the Marvel Legends one. And that is truly a complete range of motion. Now, we will not go away without talking about the wrist. And this is what McFarlane is known for. He has a ball peg. Now, in all honesty, I could say that at first there was a kind of, hit and miss because they didn't have the exact science down for the wrist ball joint. But now, as you can see with the clean lines, they have pretty much gotten to the apex of what it's going to be and how it works. So it looks clean, looks good going down from the forearms into the hand. But what you do get is you get 4 ways of range of articulation. You get the bend there and then back up. And if you twist it and catch the hinge perfectly, you get the other range of motion. Now, the reason I like this, I prefer this, is because when you have weapons like swords, guns, this allows you to get a full possibility of poses with the weapons. Like you could drape the sword over his shoulder, and if he has a sheath, he could, put it in there. But if he's actually pointing a gun at you, he can actually tilt his wrist and get just a wider range of poses that the simple wrist joints that the Legends have does not allow you to get. So once again, we have to give this round to McFarlane in a complete look at the shoulders, the elbows, and the wrist joints. So that's 2 rounds for McFarlane. Now this is kind of off topic, but I do want to spotlight it real quick, and that is that if you look at the Marvel Legends, it's just so plain. There is no sculpt lines at all throughout the costume, no little wrinkles to show that it's cloth. Even the neckline has no separation from the actual neck into the actual shirt. So that's kind of disappointing, but it is kind of what Marvel Legends collectors, I guess, like, because it has never changed. It's usually the same body book without any sculpture. But if you look at the McFarlane, look at all of that detailed line. Even the scales on his left side are sculpted in. And then you get this other side that should be traditionally just a black, flat costume. He has a lot of design and piping lines and sculpture, which I prefer. I actually like detailed work. And I mean, you can go either way. If you like your plain Marvel Legends with no sculpt lines, that's fine. But I actually prefer to have a little bit of style and character to each figure. So I do like the added sculpt work that McFarlane adds. But once again, we're not looking at that right now. We're looking solely at articulation. Let's go ahead and do some T-pose action. Now the Marvel Legends does have a beautiful T-pose. Let's see if he could get higher than that, which actually he cannot. Now I do know that some Marvel Legends, predominantly more athletic ones like Spider-Man, could probably get a higher range. If you push it, it does move up a little, but it is kind of tight. But if you do move his arms forward, you can get them above his head, which is nice. Now, they do not touch. There's just no way, keeping his arms straight, there's no way that his hands are going to clasp over his head. That is pretty much impossible. But if you do put him forward and put him just the right way, it does get closer to where he can actually put his hands directly in front of his body, which is a nice range of articulation there. But let's go ahead and let Deathstroke have his turn. Now he does have the classic T-pose, but the added benefit of these ring butterfly joints is that he can actually go higher, really simply, almost to a Y pose. So that's just a little added range that he has. Now you can also put his arms forward and put them above his head, but surprisingly, without actually bending the elbows or twisting them, his hands actually can touch. And you get that, that added little range that is just something that puts you over the edge articulation wise. And even going forward, as I did with the crossbones, his hands can touch in front of him with minimal bending of the elbows. I mean, they're pretty much straight on, and you do get that added little range. So once again, we are going to have to give this round to DC Multiverse. Just with that different design of butterfly joint, it just takes the range at the shoulders to a whole nother level. Now, I did see recently that Hasbro actually showed a figure, I'm not sure which one it was, and it actually has these shoulder disc joints in it. So that is what I mean when I say that Hasbro is actually inching their way more towards a McFarlane style articulation. Even if you don't want to hear it, it is what it is. It's the truth. You just get more range from this style of shoulder joint. Now, just for the fun of it, I did try the back spread because McFarlane is starting to actually cut out gaps where you can get the shoulders into there, but they're pretty much tied. The Crossbones figure can also reach back, not as much, but he doesn't have any cutouts like some of the Marvel Legends figures do to give him that added little bit of range. Now we'll move down into the ab area, the ab crunch. Now, first off, one thing I noticed right away is that he has like this T ab crunch, but there's a big gap on both sides. And I don't like that because you can actually see straight through the figure. And I'm pretty sure this is not just this figure, since Legends likes to use that, kitchen stove cutout of the ab crunch, even though it does work well. You probably a lot of times get that little gap in there. And the thing is that it's permanent. You might get some gap in the McFarlane figure, but if you move it a certain way, you'll cover up that gap. And this one, it's just going to be there. There's no way to get rid of it. But after saying all of that, he does have a great front ab crunch. And of course, he also has a back crunch. But don't get ahead of yourself, because one thing he does not have is he does not have side to side at all, which means you can't like dip and tilt his body to get him in some more athletic poses. He's just not moving there at all. And another thing that a lot of Legends fanboys really harp on is their waist swivel. But I have to say, seeing it here in hand, when you swivel the waist, right away it gets that ugly cut right at the hips, like above the hips. And as soon as you turn it, it just breaks up the sculpt, and it really is not appealing to the eye. So it is what it is. Let's take a look at the McFarlane Deathstroke figure. Now, he does have side to side range of motion where you could actually lean him for different poses. He also does have a pretty good ab crunch. Now, this is not normal for McFarlane figures. They're notoriously lacking in the front ab crunch, but he does have one, and that means that they're progressing in their articulation. So that's pretty nice to see. And of course, he can also lean back just as far as the Legends figure. And actually, it looks pretty clean. There's no breakup of the sculpt. And if you twist his waist, there's no breakup there. The way you see it on the waist swivel of the Legend, you could bend him any way you want, and you'll never get that ugly separation of the two pieces. He has a beautiful full range of swivel there with the two joints, one at the lower waist and one inside the chest. So once again, this is just superior articulation to the standard Marvel Legends, and another win goes in for the DC Multiverse. Now we're going to be getting into the crotch section, and this has been a thing I've really been battling in the comment sections and against other collectors. And I just do not like the lines in the Legend style of figures, and even a lot of other lines use the same thing, and that is like a T crotch. Because what ends up happening is you have a constant gap above the thigh and into the crotch piece, and it's just something that my eye goes directly to, and it basically looks horrible. And if you put the figure up and you draw the lines, you could see what I'm trying to say is that it has the silhouette, but then it breaks up when it goes into the crotch, and it gives you like some big gaps. And you could think that this adds to the range of motion, but it actually doesn't, and it just looks really, really ugly. Now, if you take a look at the Multiverse figure, he actually has simple, clean lines going from the top and coming down into the thigh. It's just one line. There's no breakup. And even going underneath into the lower crotch, it's just two straight lines. There, you don't have that ugly, constant gap that the T crotches have, and it's just more appealing to my eye because it looks more like a clean silhouette without any breakup. And that is something that might be a little bit subjective, like people have different likes, but not to me. I could pretty much tell you that this looks cleaner and doesn't break up as much as the Marvel Legends does. But this actually does take us into the thigh articulation. Now pretty much, let's just go into articulation right away. He can only kick up 90 degrees before you hit right there where the T crotch is cut out, and he cannot kick back at all, basically. I mean, minimal, it's like nothing. So this means if you wanted to do the front splits, it's only gets about that much before it stops. And then in the side splits, you could push it, but it will not stay, and it's not a complete split. You still have that kind of Y shape. So I do know that other figures do get the complete splits, but of course we're going on just a standard Legends figure, and nope, he does not get the splits. Now let's take a look at the McFarlane. First of all, he kicks up really high, more than 90 degrees, and then he kicks back probably 90 degrees, but more range than a Legends figure does. And this is actually allowed by the rubber in the trunks, because since they're soft, they actually move out of the way, and when you put it back, eventually they just go back to their original form, so there's no problem there. But if you do the front to back splits, he can actually get a perfect split. And if you do the regular split, he gets up there. Now I did modify mine and put a holster with a gun, so I think the gun's gonna jam him up there, but if you move the gun out of the way, he does get basically a perfect split. So nice range there. But the legs is not only about the splits, the legs is actually about the thigh cuts and the boot movement and all of that. So let's take a look at that. First, let's do the knees. Now, he does have double jointed knees, but he cannot get really much more than a 90-degree angle. I mean, he gets a little bit more. You could force it, but it won't stay. So that's kind of not too much range. And then going back, of course, he will not ever be able to kick his back. So you have that in the knees. Let's take a look at the McFarlane. Of course, he does have double jointed knees as well. Now, although it does not close all the way, it is more than 90 degrees. And if you put it to the back, he can actually kick his own back, or at least get close to it. Now that is some beautiful full range of motion. And then let's do something that I've always wanted to explain, and that is the thighs. Now, although probably 100% of Legends have this boot cut, the one thing that I do not like is that for people that always complain about like realistic anatomy and stuff like that, this is not realistic anatomy. And once you actually turn it, it just looks really ugly. You show the cut there. So to turn the boot inwards, you would actually use the thigh cut. So you thigh cut it and it does turn the boot, but once again, you're actually getting a really ugly cut here at the thigh, which is why I do not like thigh cuts, because I like my figures to line up. Not too fond of that. Now let's take a look at the McFarlane figure. Now the McFarlane figure does have a hip swivel actually inside the joint where the hip is at. So even without the thigh cut, if you wanted to turn the boot in, you can actually swivel the hip and it actually turns the boot in, and you still have that clean line without that hideous thigh cut. And you do have twist at the foot, so if you wanted to change the foot direction, you don't need a boot cut. You could do the foot and it actually doesn't break up the sculpt at all the way the boot cut does. So once again, McFarlane is far superior in the leg articulation, at least in my eyes. And for the final point, let's take a look at the feet. Now, you do get a nice range up and down from the Marvel Legends. This is classic Marvel Legends. I do compliment them where it is, and that is that this is a really nice hinge and swivel as well. But one thing they do not have is they do not have toe articulation. Now that's another thing, is that now they're making Spider-Man figures with toe articulation, and the Legends collectors, fanboys losing their soy. But I mean, Spider-Man should have always had toe articulation for the way he like gets on walls and the poses that he gets into. So that's kind of something that I wouldn't really be celebrating. Now let's take a look at the McFarlane foot. And of course you do get up and down, pretty much similar range. You also get the swivel, which works really smoothly and well. But of course you do have the added toe articulation with basically all Multiverse figures. So once again, from the top to the bottom, McFarlane took all of the of the wins in the articulation. I mean, it's sad, but it's true. Before we go, let's have a little bit of a pose down, and that's gonna be where first we'll do like a kicking pose. Of course, Deathstroke could get it all the way up almost to your face, and then we'll go ahead and put Crossbones in there, but he can't kick up as high because of the range of his hips, so it kind of looks like a really amateurish high kick. Now let's do a kind of like yoga pose where you kind of spread your legs out and tilt your ankle. And actually the Crossbones has a really nice position on this one. I just would say he doesn't get really low to the ground. He kind of stays up. And then of course the McFarlane figure is far superior and gets lower to the ground and has a wider stance than the actual Legends figure does. Now lastly, let's do a superhero landing pose. Marvel Legends are known for these, and I will not take that away from them. Classic superhero landing pose, even out of someone as bulky as Crossbones. But McFarlane is not too far behind. He can actually get down into a deeper stance. It was just a little bit harder to do it than I had to fiddle with the Legends figure. So hey, let's give one to the Legends side, even though it is a minimal win. Now for my final thoughts, I do want to say this, and that is that this could have been avoided because Marvel fanboys just love to run their mouth about how Legends are superior to DC Multiverse. And as we could see today, it really doesn't hold up. But one thing I will say, and that is that all lines have different figures. All lines have different figures with different ranges of articulation. I know that the Spider-Mans from this line are really articulated, and I know that some of the McFarlane figures lose some of the articulation because of some of the added sculpt work. But this just goes to show you that some of the narratives being pushed about McFarlane are not really true. These are not statues. They are highly articulated and beautifully sculpted figures. But you guys keep hunting out there, keep collecting, keep customizing, and I will see you on the next one.